When it first aired on Western shores, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers was a cultural phenomenon, a kaleidoscope of colour, action and energy that captivated a generation. I and many other children everywhere were glued to our screens, mimicking martial arts moves in our living rooms and debating endlessly over who got to be the Green Ranger during playground battles. As with any franchise that captivates kids on this scale, it naturally sparked an avalanche of merchandise, and of course a wave of video games. This slew of titles would become available as of Christmas 1994, so they were released on 16-bit game consoles and their accompanying 8-bit handhelds. What's particularly intriguing though is that by Christmas 1993, Power Rangers was already a massive phenomenon in the United States. So with no game released that year, you'd think it took a bit of time to cook up games to cash in on the craze, but one would be mistaken. The Japanese Famicom already had a game featuring these iconic costume-clad heroes. It baffles me that this game never made it to the West, especially considering how popular both the NES and Power Rangers were in the US. It's a mystery why this potential gold mine remained confined to the land of the rising sun. So holding such thoughts in mind, join me today as we look back at this title, delve into its curious place in history, look at its gameplay, and uncover what exactly it was that we missed out on. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the bizarre tale of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for NES. Yeah! For many, the NES in 1993 was like an old friend, who'd been with you through thick and thin, a gateway to some of the happiest, simplest moments of childhood. While no longer the king of the gaming hill, it still easily had its place in the hearts of gamers, with new releases continuing to hit store shelves. Many may have upgraded to 16-bit hardware, but many kids still had their NES plugged into the second TV or tucked away in a bedroom, ready to fire up after homework. For others, it was the system they just inherited from an older sibling or cousin, sparking a love for gaming that remains to this day. What I'm trying to reinforce to you here is the NES was kind of a big deal, and this platform was still very much relevant, with smash hits like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, The Manhattan Project, and Kirby's Adventure making it to market that same year. The situation was clear, the NES wasn't going down without a fight, and these late gems proved the hardware had more life in it than many expected, delivering unforgettable experiences even as the gaming world moved on. And do you know what would have been the icing on the cake during this time? The Western release of a game that frustratingly actually existed elsewhere. One which, in my opinion, could have easily been the best-selling game on the platform that year. In fact, as a packing game, this could have probably even shifted a few more consoles as well. Just imagine it, the NES receiving a Power Rangers game. It would have felt like the perfect swan song for the system, going out on a massive commercial high, similar to how Pokemon gave the Game Boy the perfect send-off. It's an absolute travesty that this never happened. It's one of those what-ifs that could have drastically changed history as we know it. After all, people still talk about the Turtles games from this era, even though the original NES game is considered by many to be kind of jank. Still, no matter what you think of that game's quality, there is no question that it helped shift consoles, but my heart will always be with the arcade beat-em-ups. Speaking of these games, how freaking good is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge? What a fantastic brawler! If you haven't had the chance to play it, I've got a fantastic opportunity for you to try it at a great price. By using my affiliate link, you can snag an incredible 50% off this must-play game. But that's not all. My links in the pinned comment also give you access to discounts of up to 90% off on thousands of other games too. So take advantage of these amazing deals, and I hope you enjoy both the savings and the rest of this video. As you likely already knew, in the early days, all costumed fight scenes in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers were lifted straight out of the Japanese-produced Super Sentai. Or more specifically, in 1993, all came from Kyoryu Sentai ZyuRanger, a Japanese series that had already done all the cool stuff. The American crew just spliced in some high school drama, a few poorly synchronized lines, and presto, instant cultural phenomenon. It was like reheating leftovers and calling yourself a gourmet chef. After all, why choreograph your own Megazord battles when you can just reuse some Japanese ones and call it a day? Angel Grove might have looked suspiciously different every time they suited up, but it was all part of the charm. But hey, everyone knows this, right? Of course you did. It's just nice to remind ourselves how brilliantly lazy but also kind of genius this whole thing really was. But one thing we should additionally remind ourselves of is that Super Sentai had existed in Japan way before 1993. This explains why a ZyuRanger game existed on the Famicom in 1992, featuring all the costumes as well as notorious villains from the show, way before the Power Rangers ever existed. What's even crazier is that the original Super Sentai series first aired way back in 1975, an astonishing 18 years before these costume heroes appeared in the West. And here's the real twist. The suits many of us grew up with seeing weren't from the first generation of heroes, but actually the 16th. So while we perceived this iconic lineup to be the first Rangers, we were fed a massive lie as children, as there was an entire 18-year back catalogue of content and older costumes that they hid away from us all. I think if I had have known this in the 90s, my brain would have melted from the sheer shock of it all. Imagine discovering that the original heroes you idolised were actually latecomers in a much larger legacy. It would be like finding out your favourite band has been releasing albums for decades before the one you thought was their debut. The idea of all these earlier teams, each with unique themes and adventures, existing in secrecy from Western audiences, feels almost like uncovering a secret vault of lost treasures, and the game that is the centrepiece of today's topic is very much part of this legacy. On the subject of this game that was deprived from the West, since Super Sentai had existed in Japan for nearly 2 decades, this was not even the first Super Sentai game on the Famicom either. That honour instead goes to Chikyu Sentai 5 Manu, based on the 14th series of the franchise. It was a side-scrolling action game with basic combat mechanics, which I might cover in the future. But of course today we are focused on the depiction of these heroes we are all nostalgic for. Bringing us to Kyoryu Sentai ZyuRanger, and this team's accompanying video game. ZyuRanger, which aired in Japan from 1992 to 1993, was moderately successful, but not a standout hit compared to other entries in the Super Sentai franchise. This show was nothing new to the Japanese. It adhered to the familiar formula of costumed heroes, battling monsters and piloting giant mechas. While it was well received by fans of the genre, it wasn't particularly groundbreaking, with other generations of the show overshadowing ZyuRanger in cultural significance. This meant that merchandise tied to the show, such as toys, mega figures, and of course the video game, performed steadily but did not reach exceptional sales levels. In fact, the difference in popularity between ZyuRanger in Japan and Power Rangers in the West is remarkable. While this game could easily have been a commercial hit in the United States, in Japan it simply represented another entry in a genre that felt routine: spandex-clad heroes battling rubber-suited monsters, a staple of Japanese pop culture. A standard thing in a region like Tokyo where Godzilla attacks your city every single day. There is no question that this content blended into the background. This to me makes it all the more baffling that no apparent effort was made to bring the game to the US, where it might have found a much more enthusiastic audience. But just because it sold well is no indication as to whether the game is actually good. So let's discuss the gameplay itself. Just like its predecessor on the hardware, Sentai ZyuRanger is a side-scrolling action game. This title was developed by a respected studio, Arc System Works, and published by Angel, a subsidiary of Bandai. Much like the 16-bit games we enjoyed in the West, this 8-bit game's title screen features a rendition of the show's theme melody. However, due to the limitations of the Famicom's hardware, there are no lyrics accompanying the tune this time. But thankfully, at least later, James Rolfe added his own vocals to the 8-bit track. Prior to each stage, we also get scenes with written dialogue to help set the scene, all of which have been translated into English by fans, aiding us in following the story's very simple premise. The main action is divided into 5 stages, each featuring one of the ZyuRangers as playable characters. Stage 1 highlights Tiger Ranger, aka Boy, in a jungle setting. Stage 2 follows Patera Ranger, aka Mai, through a windy mountain region. Stage 3 follows on Tricera Ranger, aka Dan, in dark underground caverns. Stage 4 features Mammoth Ranger aka Goshi in a treacherous ice tundra, and Stage 5 climaxes with Tyranno Ranger aka Geki navigating Witch Pandora's magical palace, a character who you will recognise as being positioned as Rita Repulsa in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. The goal is to navigate these themed environments, defeat enemies, and confront a boss at the end of each level. Players start with a standard weapon, the Ranger Gun, which can be upgraded to each ZyuRanger's legendary weapon by locating rooms via doorways on the stage. Adding to the premise, collectibles such as coins are scattered throughout the stages, and when 10 are gathered, these restore the player's health and provide a visual reward in the form of an image and description of the character's mecha. I must comment that, to me at least, it seems like a really odd choice to make ZyuRanger a side-scrolling platformer, rather than the more logical route such as making it a beat-em-up or versus fighter, genres that seem better suited to the action-packed fighting spirit of the show. The series thrives on dynamic team combat, flashy martial arts, and dramatic one-on-one battles with iconic villains, elements that could have been better captured in a beat-em-up like Double Dragon or a fighter akin to Street Fighter 2. Much like the games that arrived after the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers craze had started in the West. A platformer by comparison feels like a bit of a constrained choice, considering the franchise was known for its larger-than-life action. One can only assume that this decision may have been influenced by the Famicom's limitations, or the popularity of platformers at the time, as they were easier to develop and appeal to a broader audience. I suppose that while Street Fighter was a mainstream hit, so was Super Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog, so what do I know? Even the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game for the NES was a side-scrolling platformer, so maybe developers believed this was the genre kids really wanted at the time. Platformers were the bread and butter of the gaming industry in the early 90s, easy to pick up and marketable to a wide audience. Still, it feels a bit peculiar, almost comical, that ZyuRanger opens with us controlling Power Rangers punching snakes in a forest. Where are the putty patrollers, or Pandora's more threatening monsters? It's a strange choice to pit our brightly costumed heroes against random wildlife, which feels more like filler than a proper extension of the show's high-stake battles. If anything, it underscores how mismatched the side-scrolling platformer genre can be for a franchise that's all about martial arts action and defeating fantastical villains. The mind boggles. While we can mock this lack of faithfulness to the source material, in other areas the game effectively captures the essence of a TV series, especially regarding the lineup of playable characters. Apart from the game making us play a stage as each of the 5 ZyuRangers, another highlight are the unique characters' abilities, in that each can unlock their own legendary weapon from the show, providing a stronger link to the series lore. Each stage also includes, as mentioned, boss battles against iconic villains from the TV show, which is a nice touch. But sadly, these aren't the monsters of the week like in the show itself, but instead Pandora's entourage of minions who serve her in her palace. This to me is a tad odd, as usually in the show, not only do most of these characters never engage in direct combat with the Rangers, but they are not even depicted as physical threats. Instead, they are portrayed as schemers, comic relief or background figures who support the witch's plans rather than taking on the Rangers directly. Characters like Squat and Babu, known as Bookback and Totpat in Japan for instance, are more about mischief and assisting Pandora than engaging in actual fights. This makes their roles as stage bosses feel somewhat out of character and diminishes the opportunity to showcase the show's memorable Monster of a Week format, which was a hallmark of ZyuRanger storytelling. In fact, it makes me question whether the developers ever saw any footage from the show at all, but are instead working with images for reference. This design choice is a strange one to say the least. As for the mechanics behind these boss battles themselves, they function okay and are nothing to complain about, but at the same time they're nothing to get excited about. Sadly, I can't say the same for the side-scrolling elements of the game though. The platforming in this one is plagued by issues that undermine its quality, the most glaring being clunky controls. Movement feels sluggish and unresponsive at times, making it difficult to time jumps or react to hazards effectively as I would like. This lack of precision often leads to frustrating moments where it's easy to overshoot platforms or fall short, especially in sections that demand quick reflexes or tight manoeuvring. Another issue is the level design, which isn't exactly inspiring. The stages rely on basic layouts and repetitive hazards, such as pits and moving platforms that fail to evolve or present new challenges as the game progresses. This lack of variety makes the platforming feel bland and unmemorable, missing the opportunity to engage us with creative or dynamic sequences. Compounding this problem is the poor collision detection, which can lead to moments of unfair damage or missed jumps that feel undeserved. The game also fails to explore platforming variety, offering no unique mechanics like wall jumps, moving puzzles, or environmental interactions that add depth. This simplicity makes the platforming feel like an afterthought rather than a core element of the gameplay. Additionally, the placement of enemies exacerbates these problems. Enemies are often positioned near platforms or in tight spaces, making it difficult to navigate without taking damage. Combined with the dubious controls, these encounters can often feel more frustrating than they are genuinely challenging. But perhaps most annoyingly of all is the off-screen environmental hazards and enemies, with it often being required to make leaps of faith to make any progress. What makes this worse is I often found myself landing on spikes or enemies that hurt my ranger, which is incredibly unfair considering the game provides you with no signposting to know that this is coming. These hazards are often positioned in ways that force players to take damage unless they've memorized the level layout through trial and error. This design choice disrupts the flow of the game and diminishes the sense of accomplishment that should come from skill-based platforming. It's a bit disgraceful, really. Sadly, despite the game's giant robot battles being a core feature of the show in both the East and the West, the game doesn't allow players to engage in combat using the Zords. There are no epic mecha showdowns at the end of any stages, which is a disappointing omission for fans who would have loved to pilot their favourite Zords in battle. But at least we have the Green Ranger in this one. Well, kind of anyway. The resident edgelord known as the Dragon Ranger in Japan reappears as the classic bad boy turned ally, and naturally he gets a special role in the game, but not the kind of role anyone would have actually wanted. Instead, his grand contribution is hosting a series of mini-games between stages. Yes, the most popular character from the entire show is reduced to being a glorified carnival barker. Absolutely ridiculous. Amongst the challenges involving him, there's the trivia quiz, where you answer questions about the show, because nothing screams action-packed adventure like sitting through a multiple-choice questionnaire about which episode Pandora did something evil. Then there's the Pong-style game. Yes, Pong. The game from the 1970s, except this time it's the Megazord and Dragonzord lazily bouncing a ball at each other. Because yeah, why put something in the game that would have made sense to its fan base when you can have iconic robots having a ping pong match? It's madness. Finally, if that's not for you, we have one final offering. We can play as the Dragonzord and play hot potato against who was known as Scorpina in the West. It's about as thrilling as it sounds, which is to say, not at all. Looking at these mini-games, it's as if the developers thought, hey, we've got this cool ZyuRanger everyone loves. What if we just have him host party games instead of doing anything remotely heroic? Truly a missed opportunity for the ages. But considering how much I've poked fun at this one, was it truly a missed opportunity not releasing this one in the West? Well, personally, I still think so. Sure, it's rough around the edges and it could have been a lot better, but there's a certain charm to it that fans of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers would have appreciated. The game captures enough of the show's essence, however clumsily, to appeal to kids who were swept up in the Power Rangers craze of the early 90s. The novelty of controlling their favourite Rangers and fighting recognisable villains would have been enough to sell copies, even if the gameplay didn't live up to the standards of some other releases. Besides, let's be honest, rough, licensed games weren't exactly rare back then. If Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the NES could frustrate players with its swimming levels and still become a classic, this game could have carved out its niche too. After all, in the early 90s, anything with a tie to a popular franchise practically sold itself. So yes, it is a missed opportunity. If nothing else, releasing this game in the West could have ridden the Power Rangers hype train to decent success. And let's face it, we've all played worse games than this and still managed to have fun. It may not have been groundbreaking, but it had enough going for it to become a nostalgic footnote for a generation of kids obsessed with Morphin Time. Because the truth is, sometimes all a game needs is a little spandex, some flashy moves, and a catchy theme song to become a childhood classic. This one might not be spectacular, but don't forget Shredder's Revenge is. Use my affiliate link and you can grab this game at an incredible 50% off, as well as get deals of up to 90% off of thousands of other games too. Don't miss out on these amazing deals, snag some great games, and I will see you all soon. Cheerio!